Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Oh, hey. Well, let me tell the class what's been going on. So, in the middle of the night, I heard this noise, and I went out to check, and sure enough, Little Bit, who was an adopted cat, was testing out the studio desk and was walking across the mixer. And there are probably about 100 switches, knobs, sliders. And I think he was able to step on a few of them. So if the audio's not right, I'm going to try to figure it out exactly what happened between now and, I don't know, soon. So, Jason, is the audio acceptable at this point for the broadcast to continue or not?
Yeah, it should work okay.
Okay. All right, so we're going to let it go. Kyle's with us. Welcome, Kyle.
Good morning, Vince. Yeah, your audio to me is great.
Okay, very good. So, class, today we're going to talk about tips from the book. Kyle is in the front of the classroom to add, subtract, multiply, or divide those tips. He can certainly add his wealth of knowledge to the tips. And this is from my unfinished, unpublished, not available for sale book. So I really have no intention to publish this book. So the way it would be disseminated would be through the radio waves. So here's a thought. Kyle, I know that in your life you have been an assistant service manager at an automotive dealership. And so some of the tips will relate to that and some of them to your other passion, which would be electricity. And let's start with the automotive section. So we have several trucks here at the farm, and two of them have Chevrolet 4.3 liter V6 engines. One of them is 2001 model, the other is a 2004 model. And the filter that they typically use in this particular vehicle, Chevrolet recommends a Fram. They don't necessarily recommend Fram brand, but in the Fram world, there's a part number 3980, Fram 3980. The height of, they recommend a 3387A. The height of that is about 3.4 inches. So it's a short filter. I'm talking about an oil filter. 3.4 inches. Now, you could go to a website and look up oil filter cross-reference. And you could find the original equipment oil filter, and you could find other oil filters that would fit. And with a little bit of diligence and a little bit of work, maybe 10 minutes at the most, you can find a larger one that would hold more oil, one that has a larger can, one that has more filter media, and may even cost less. So that's what I do. So the one that they recommend is 3.4 inches in height. And the one that we use is 5 inches in height. So roughly a third larger, at least. That's what we do. Kyle, any comments on that?
It's interesting, Vince. I've done that for years with my pickups. The newer Chevy pickups, or sometimes even some of the Toyota car engines. You can go to. Wasn't on the internet at all back then, and I still have not. I don't still have a computer or anything. This phone is about as close as it gets. But you can go to the auto parts store a lot of times and ask them if there's a bigger, longer filter that you can use, because common sense tells you that, the more filter medium that you have in your filter, the cleaner your oil will stay for a longer. So that just makes sense. Yeah, it's a great idea.
So, class, here's the plan. The way I think this evolved was when cars were first manufactured, there was no such thing as an oil filter. And Purolator Company which stood for Pure Oil Later, meaning pure oil after the filter, which is kind of a stretch. It wasn't pure, but it's just cleaner anyway. They developed the first oil filter for automotive use. And I believe that cars that used to have a 5-quart crankcase system, meaning, like, let's say you had a 1960s something or other Ford or Chevy, your engine would use 5 quarts of oil. But over time, the oil capacity in passenger cars has gotten smaller. And I believe it's because the accountants have said, we don't need to put 5 quarts of oil in these engines. Let's try 4. And instead of having an oil filter that holds a quart of oil all by itself, let's use one that holds a half a quart or a third of a quart. Now, what happens is the oil in the engine does several things. Number one, of course, it lubricates the moving parts that are subjected to intense friction, and the friction causes heat. And the proof of that is in the wintertime, your hands are cold and you rub your hands together. Well, the friction warms your hands up. Well, just 2 parts moving across each other causes friction and heat. Well, the oil between those parts prevents some of that friction, and it removes the heat from those parts. So the oil actually cools these red-hot parts. Now, how hot am I talking about? Well, some parts in the engine might hit 15 to 1800 degrees, like the valve stems of the intake and exhaust valves. They get really hot. So the oil removes the heat, transfers it to the block. The block transfers it to the cooling system. The cooling system transfers it to the radiator, and the radiator transfers it to the outside air. So the oil does a tremendous job. So if you can add a little bit more oil, like let's say go from 4 quarts to 4.5 quarts or 5 quarts, that's a big deal. As a percentage, you're adding a lot more oil as a percentage, which adds to more cooling capacity of the oil. And it also adds a larger radiating surface of the oil filter, because those little tiny oil filters don't have as much radiating steel of the can of the oil filter as a larger can would. So there's a lot of reasons why you should consider using a larger oil filter if it will fit, and if it has the bypass valve, and if it has the right diameter sealing gasket. Those all have to be, checked. But if you can do that, it makes a lot of sense. So that's what we do here at the farm on every single one of our vehicles. If we get a new vehicle here in the shop for our own personal use, the first thing we do if we're changing the oil is to find a bigger, better oil filter. And I have a brand that I recommend. It's not the most expensive, but I have a tool that it's called an exhaust pipe cutter. And it looks like, if you've ever cut copper pipe with a copper pipe cutter, it looks like that, except it has a bunch of these wheel cutters on a chain. And you wrap it around an exhaust pipe, and you tighten it, and then you rotate these cutters around the exhaust pipe, and slowly but surely it will cut the pipe in half. Well, I use that cutter on oil filters. And if I want to know if an engine is sludgy or dirty, or what happens, what the oil is picking up and filtering and getting trapped in the oil filter, I'll cut open an oil filter after I take it out. Kyle, do you do that as well?
I have not, Vince, but I have seen times when I was at the auto mechanic, the dealership that I used to work at. One of the mechanics there actually had one of those, and he cut about 5 or 6 of them all down, and we took a look at them, and I thought it was really interesting. At the time when we tested this, which would have been the late 90s, the best filter we found was the Wicks. And I'm curious as to what you have found.
Okay, I've cut a bunch of them. Wicks, Fram, Purolator, Bosch, Lubrifiner, STP, Supertech, which is the house brand for Walmart, AC Delco, Ford. I've cut them all open. And and by the way, no matter what the brand is, there aren't very many manufacturers that make them. So many of the brands that I mentioned come from 2 or 3 manufacturing houses, although they're sold under different brand names. So, and Wix, I've cut that open too. The Gold, and the Standard. Well, Wix is fine, but they're not all of them are of the same quality. Not all of the Frams are of the same quality. Not all of the lubrifiners. They have different qualities. And when I worked at an auto parts store, I learned something that was quite interesting. Let's say there was a manufacturer of, and we'll just use oil filters. Let's say a Fram didn't make all the oil filters to fit all the cars. And the Fram sales guy would come into an auto parts store and say, hey, we'd like you to sell Fram oil filters because we think they're the best. And the owner of the store would say, okay, well, what about the coverage? Do you cover all these models? And the Fram guy would say either yes or no. They'd say, well, we've got some of them. And then the salesperson from the auto store would say, well, it doesn't matter if they're the best in the world. If you don't cover most of the models we need, then we'd have to carry Fram and AC Delco and Ford and Mopar, and we don't want to do that. So what would happen is the oil filter manufacturers would buy their competitors' filters and put them in their box. So, for example, and I'm making this up. This is not exact, but it's indicative. So Fram might buy oil filters from AC Delco if they had a part number that Fram didn't make. And they put the AC Delco filter in the Fram box. But it wouldn't say AC Delco on the side. It wouldn't say anything. I mean, it wouldn't look like an AC Delco blue filter. It would, be painted, a neutral color. So what they did, what I'm saying is not all oil filters are made by the company that you think is making them. So they're not all the same. So cutting to the chase, I've read so many, reports on the internet from these guys who think they know everything that they say Fram oil filters are junk. Well, that's not true. I have at least 100 Fram oil filters here at the farm, and I like them, and they're just fine. And I like AC Delco, but AC Delco changed their manufacturer, and they're not as good as they used to be. And so what is a good oil filter? Well, I can tell you that the house brand for AutoZone, and I buy a lot of parts from AutoZone, but there's no financial relationship. I'm just telling you because I've evaluated them. The AutoZone brand is STP. That's the Andy Granatelli's company. And I think they've licensed the logo and the name STP, and they use it on their branded oil and their branded oil filters and maybe some other parts. I've cut them open and they're just fine. Okay. So you can save some money and buy those STP branded oil filters and they're just fine. So that's one thought. And we probably have, over 100 or more of them at the farm as well. So, that's my thought on oil filters. And the other thing is when we put one on, we fill the oil filter with oil 90% full. So if it screws in and you hold it at the base and you screw it upwards, you can put 90% clean oil in the oil filter, and that way you won't be starting your engine without lubrication. Any comments, Kyle, going into a break?
Yeah, if you can install the oil filter with the bottom on the bottom, that works. That works.
Right. All right, we'll be right back. I'm going to ask Kyle if he has more comments. Kyle's with us, and we're talking about tips from the book, and he's sharing his wealth of expertise. Kyle, I changed the oil on, and I've talked about this in the past, but I think it's so important. That's why I wanted to mention it again quickly today. I change the oil when it's hot. Not hot temperature outside, but when the engine oil is hot, per se. So after a trip of, let's say, 30, 40 miles at a minimum, I come back, I've got everything all ready to go, the drain pan, the wrenches, get under the vehicle if I'm going to do it outside, pull the oil filter, pull the drain plug, and I let it drain overnight on a level surface. So I get all the old oil out that's possible. Your comments on that procedure?
Well, that's absolutely the best. I mean, it's interesting. We used to have an older gentleman when I was at the dealership, and he drove a Ford diesel pickup, and he pulled trailers a lot. And it had the old it had the 6.9 Ford diesel in it, which was an international diesel, very, very well-built motor. But he would drive his truck in at night just before quitting time and would tell at the time, the oil filler, the oil change guy, his name was Dan at the time. Anyway, tell him, said, well, you know what I'm here for. I want you to change the oil in the truck and let it sit there overnight. And so he would. He put it up on the lift, raised it up, open the drain plug, start draining. And one time, Dan put a clean pan after it stopped, just going to a drip. And so anyway, he put a clean pan underneath that truck and just let it set to see if it was really worth it, so he could show the guy the next morning, And would you believe, by the time the morning was over, of course, the diesel takes more oil than a gasoline engine. But at the end of the next morning, when Dan checked it, it had dripped out a half a quart of oil more that he was going to be able to put back in there. I was really surprised that it would drip that much more.
Yes, absolutely. And my findings have been, at a minimum, for a small American passenger car engine, I'm talking like a little 4-cylinder, at least a half a cup. And for a larger, and when I'm talking about a cup, I'm talking about a coffee mug kind of a cup, to a full cup. That's what I've seen on just a gasoline-powered engine. So when you're looking at an 8-quart system for a diesel, absolutely, you are right, spot on the money. And I've done that with a friend. I had a former friend here, and he'd come over, and I'd teach him about auto mechanics. And so we're going to have lunch here in the good old days, before the Corona panic. And I said, let's change the oil, and you tell me when you think that the Jiffy Lube or the Walmart or whatever that quick change company when would they put the drain plug in? He said, about now. And I said, okay, so let's put another pan under there, and let's catch the oil, and we'll go have lunch. And we came out, and within an hour or so, it was exactly what you said. So the dripping slows down, but in order to make this happen the way Kyle is describing it, the oil has to be hot. And the reason is, you all know this, class. If you are cooking French fries, for example, and you start out with fresh oil out of your cupboard, you know the viscosity of that oil. And when you're done with that oil, you pour off the best oil, you put it in the refrigerator, and it gets cold, and now you try to pour the oil. And it's much more viscous. It's resistant to flowing. Well, if you have a cold engine, the oil is not going to want to drain out. And worse than that is the soot, the particles, the contaminants are not in suspension. So they don't come running out when you pull the drain plug out. They sit at the bottom of the oil pan because that's where they've settled overnight. And I've done another experiment, Kyle. I've taken a copper wire, and I very carefully wrapped a mechanic's shop towel, a disposable one, a blue one, around a small amount, kind of make it a Q-tip, if you will. And I pushed that into the oil pan, and I kind of mopped up the bottom of the oil pan. The amount of dirt that is still in there, even after dripping out all night, is amazing how much dirt and soot is in that engine. So I'm talking about an engine that might have 100,000 miles on it. Now, I don't recommend you do what I mentioned, because if you lose that rag inside the engine, you got a huge problem getting it out. So don't do that. That's something that it's very, very risky to do. I don't do that unless I really want to see what's going on. There are better ways, like a camera on a wire. Any quick comments before we go into a break?
No, I've got a good, funny story for you after the break.
All right, we'll be right back with Kyle's story. Talking about tips from the book today. Kyle's with us. Kyle, you got a funny story?
I do, but I wanted to say one other thing before I get to the story. Folks, if you are going to change your oil hot, you better be wearing some kind of a nitrile glove, which you should wear anyway. You should keep rags handy, paper towels or shop towels or something like that handy, because I will tell you the plug is very hot and the oil is hotter. So if it drops down your hand and runs down your hand for some reason because you didn't get the plug out of the way fast enough, it will burn you. So do that. Use your common sense. Use your head, and you absolutely should, in my opinion, you absolutely should learn to change your own oil and do as much maintenance as you possibly can on your own vehicles while you can learn it easily without it being a necessity. But that's just an extremely simple thing that you should learn to do. But I just wanted to put that warning out there because I guarantee you it can burn you bad, especially if you follow our advice and get your oil hot before you change it. Anyway, that's just...
Absolutely correct. So, class, as a disclaimer, I would have to say, don't do what we do. Don't do what we do because it's risky and you can burn yourself. So after, over 50 years plus of doing this, I don't get burned because I know exactly where the oil is going to flow. And one thing you can do is you can go to help prevent this. Obviously, you want to wear those nitrile gloves that Kyle's talking about. Obviously, you want to have a long sleeve shirt on, one that you don't mind getting oil on. And you want to have rags if you get it on your hands, you want to get it off very, very quickly so you don't burn yourself. But what you can do is you can go very slowly. And when you take that drain plug out, you can use a socket with an extension and a ratchet, and you can slowly remove or unscrew the drain plug at a distance because you've used the socket and the extension to add distance between where the oil's going to run out and down and your hands. And that's what I do. And with the oil filters, I use a strap type oil filter wrench. And this is one that gets tighter as you go to unscrew the oil filter. And, they make them in different sizes and they have a range. So one size doesn't fit all. So I use the kind that's a strap. And the reason I use that is when the oil runs out the bottom of the filter, my hand is on the wrench at the top of the oil filter or at the side of the oil filter. So I don't get oil on me because of the type of wrench that I use. You can't always use that kind of a wrench, but it's great. And you might find them at yard sales for $1. I've found a bunch of them at, yard sales for $1. So that's the kind of oil filter, wrench that I use. And you need to make sure, and there's one other thing. There's a drain plug gasket, and in the old days, a drain plug gasket that would fit the drain plug would last the life of the car. Now that's not the case. With General Motors cars, they want you to replace the rubber drain plug gasket every time you change the oil. And it's designed so that the drain plug gasket, it's a metal gasket, it would normally crush. Well, no, the rubber ones only seem to work once, and then they leak the second time. So be very careful about that. And if you want your metal drain plug gasket to last a long time, what you do is you don't take the drain plug gasket off the drain plug. Okay, because it will wear against the oil pan and it will wear against the drain plug. So you'll have like grooves in the drain plug gasket. So if you take the drain plug out and keep the gasket on there the same way, the same orientation every time, it will last the life of the car if it's a metal one, meaning aluminum or copper. Any comments on that, Kyle, before your story?
Yep, absolutely correct, Vince. Yep, everything you said there's great ideas. So I was this is a funny story, and this is a warning as well in the same time. One time, this older gentleman came in and he said, my oil pressure is really low. And we thought, okay, and boy, it was like only about maybe 5 pounds showing on this thing, and the engine should have been fine. And so he said, I want to change the oil. And so we checked the dipstick, and it was full, So we run it up on the rack, and Dan at the time, the guy, took the oil plug out, thinking, things were going to run coming out of there because the engine was hot. And all of a sudden, this substance similar to honey was coming out of there. It was darker than honey, but it was just barely coming out. And so this was like we waited 10 minutes, and it was still just barely coming out. I mean, in a very small stream. Finally, we said, well, that's got to be something wrong with this. So he told the manager told the Dan to take the oil pan off because it was easy and you could just slide it out without. It was a 2-wheel drive car, and you could just. It was an older one, so you could just drop those little things with a air wrench and no big deal. So he dropped that oil pan down, and when he did, it was like there was this huge glob of honey up in there. And so we asked this guy, what kind of oil are you using? And he said, well, it was always using oil. And so every time it got a little bit low, I put another can of STP in there. And so he literally had nothing but STP practically in his entire engine. And luckily it didn't damage the engine, but we literally had to go back up in there and take rubber gloves, and you would try to pull as much of that out of there. We ended up taking the oil pump off while it was down there, had a mechanic take the oil pump out, clean it all out, and put it back up in there. And then all of a sudden we put a little bit heavier weight oil in it. At that time, we didn't have these type of cars that were taking 0 weight motor oil. But he I think his called for 1030, and I think we put 1040 in there for him at that time. And all of a sudden his oil pressure came right back up. But we just thought, this guy is just like living. He just loved the old time commercials, when you put an STP in there and it'll protect your engine, but it doesn't run on nothing but STP. Anyway, we laughed about that because we couldn't believe that somebody would keep putting that much in there.
That's a great story. And you said honey. And there was a product back then, I'm talking about in the 60s and 70s, was called motor honey. And really what it was super thick petroleum. And so some people have tried to figure out what does STP stand for. And some people would say scientifically tested product. Some would say scientifically tested petroleum. Some would say super thick petroleum. And really what it is it's a petroleum product. It's really not a good lubricant. But what some people, including myself, have done with using, and I've used STP, but I don't use it the way it's sold to be used. I used to use it and I still do when I assemble an engine. So if I'm going to assemble an engine, I might use it so that, let's say the engine assembly might take me a week. So I might use that in lieu of or in addition to 50-50 mix of STP with engine oil to lubricate the cylinder walls and bearings and so forth, so that the oil doesn't run off between the time I build the engine and the time I start the engine, a week later. But and even Andy Granatelli, the owner of STP, was quoted as saying, he was bringing a 6-pack of STP to the shop where they're building a racing engine. And I think he was asked, so you use STP in the racing engines? And he said, no. We use it to assemble the racing engines. So there you have it.
Yeah.
And if you think, if you think Kyle's kidding, he's not kidding. This stuff is just like honey. And I believe it can destroy your engine. And I think this gentleman that you're talking about was fortunate that he didn't destroy his engine. And if you read any of the owner's manuals for any of the domestic cars, probably including Mercedes and the Asians as well, you'll find out that they say don't add any oil additives to your oil, period. That's what they'll tell you. And there's a reason for that, because they don't know what all these additives are going to do. And the engine oils are generally designed to do a fairly good job, although they've not done as good of a job as they used to do because they removed some of the additives that were necessary, like phosphorus and zinc, from the engine oil. So
correct.
How much does an engine oil change cost? Well, I just looked it up, and the numbers, these are kind of staggering to me, but they say that the average cost in 2020 for an engine oil change would vary from $69 to $95, with the midpoint being around $75. Now, that seems like a lot of money for an oil change to me, but if you think about the average quart of oil costing $5, $6, $7 for good oil, it makes sense, especially if you're using 5 quarts or more, plus a quality oil filter, plus the labor, plus all the fees and taxes and all that other nonsense that we have associated with automobile repair shops. So you should do it yourself, class. And the real thing to remember is what Kyle said. let it drain overnight. And that's the big deal. And make sure you put the drain plug on with the right amount of torque. And that's kind of an art. And you'll get the hang of it. Watch some YouTube videos and learn how to do it. And make sure that if you're going to put the car up in the air, like on jack stands, that you know what you're doing so that the car doesn't fall off and crush you to death. Because there are plenty of people who have put cars up on blocks. When I say blocks, I'm talking about cinder blocks, concrete blocks, and they fail and they collapse, and then the guy gets trapped under the vehicle and is damaged permanently for life or killed. Be really careful. If you're going to use ramps, use quality ramps, drive up on them, use the parking brake, put the vehicle in park, chuck the wheels, do all that kind of stuff. But you want the engine to be level. So even if you're going to use, drive up ramps, even when after you've driven up on the ramps, you want the vehicle to be level. And keep that in mind. And you don't want it to roll off the ramps and roll over you either. So there's a lot of things to be concerned about. So if you can, the hot setup would be don't use the ramps. See if you can figure out a way of just kind of crawling under there without raising the vehicle. Any comments on that, Kyle?
Yep, absolutely true, Vince. It's because it is a dangerous thing to run up on ramps. Even if you don't get those ramps aligned correctly, you can run off of one side or have them collapse and fall off of one side, and then they're stuck underneath your car. So, there's a lot of things and I've watched a friend of mine do this one time. I just had pulled up into his house because he was going to try to change his oil for the first time, and he was going to try to have everything ready. And so he had run up on these ramps, and unfortunately, he didn't get the ramp centered in the tire. And he pulled up over there in the left side of the car, the driver's side of the car. He didn't have it lined up correctly, and the car fell off of the ramp, collapsed, and crushed the little metal ramp that he had, and now it was stuck underneath his car. And so, anyway, we ended up getting it out of there, but it was a process.
Yeah, and so, class, I recommend that if you're going to do an oil change and you're going to drive up on ramps, have somebody there with you to guide you. We'll be right back. Yes, I'm delighted to be broadcasting with Kyle, and we're talking about tips from the book. Kyle, you've been at the automotive dealership and you've seen how oil changes are done. Do you think the dealership owner would want that car to stay on the lift for an oil change for, let's say, an hour or two, or do you think they'd want the car in and out?
Absolutely not. No, they're in and out of there in anywhere from, depending on how fast the mechanic is or the guy doing it, usually younger kid. I would say from somewhere between, by the time they pull on the lift and go up, somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes on the outside. I had one thing that I wanted to mention to people too. Two things actually come to mind. If you're learning how to tighten your drain plug, get a torque wrench and look up exactly what the manufacturer tells you to do with that until you learn like Vince said, it's an art. I can do it now kind of in my sleep, and I know about how tight to get it. But you can strip that out very easily if you go too hard. And if you go too soft, the plug itself can actually work its way out from just the vibration of the engine, and then it will drain out. Lose your oil will drain out, and then you ruin your engine. So really follow if you're just now starting out learning this, please do it right. Learn how to do it right. Literally torque it down with a real torque wrench, and it might even require inch pounds. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure I think it's like around 10 to 15 foot-pounds is what if I just am remembering. It's been a long time since I even looked, but I can't tell you for every car. That I'm sure they're different a little bit. The next thing that I wanted to push on here, so folks, think about this. If we're going into really hard times, Vince and I are talking about something that is probably one of, as far as automotive maintenance goes, This is probably one of the most simple to us rudimentary type things. And just think about all of the variables that could happen to cause your car to be ruined or you to be hurt. So this is something that you can't afford to put off. This is something you should have learned years ago, and it's definitely something you need to work with and work toward now, and try to learn to if we ever get in an SHTF situation in this country or a depression and you have to do it and you try to learn this, being hurt or maimed or ruining your engine because you didn't know what you're doing is going to be catastrophic to you. So that's just a couple of thoughts I had before the top of the hour here, Vince. Your comments?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. So the oil change is a big deal. And one of the things that's on my list for having supplies is a couple oil filters at least, and a couple quantities, whatever the quantity is of the oil that you like to use, whatever that is, have it on hand. Buy it when it's on sale. Don't waste any money. Buy it when it's on sale, and you can stick with the same oil. Some mechanics over the years, the old mechanics from the 60s would say never change brands of oil. Well, I have. I mean, some people use Shell Rotella, some people use Delo, some people use, Exxon Mobil's. They're all different kinds of oil. Well, I think you can switch, but if you find one that you like, stay with it. Stay with it. Buy it when it's on sale. Keep it in your garage or wherever you would keep the oil, and get a couple oil filters. And if you want the best price on oil filters, do that cross-reference. Find the one that is bigger, that costs the same or less. And then what you do is you look up on eBay that part number. So, for example, let's say it happens to be a Fram, and it's PH8A model. You look up, instead of looking up Fram for a Jeep make and model and year Jeep, find out the exact oil filter model, brand and model number, and then look it up by the oil filter. So then you type in an eBay Fram PH8A, for example, if that's the oil filter, and you'll find all kinds of options, and then you can type in Fram PH8A, lot, which would mean you want to buy more than one, and then you find you can get 5 of them or 6 of them for the price of 2 or 3. Okay? Because if you look it up, if you say, and I've got a 1994 Jeep 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine oil filter, you're going to find more expensive oil filters than the Fram PH8A. So look it up by the part number, and that applies to washing machine parts, capacitors, drive belts, everything you can think of. Don't look it up necessarily by the fitment. Look it up by the part number for that exact part. Not what it fits, but the part. Any quick comments, Kyle, before we go into this break? Yeah,
absolutely true, Vince. Yep, absolutely true. You can do that. You can even ask for that at the auto parts store sometimes.
Yep. And when we come back, let's talk about antifreeze and coolant and some of the problems that we're seeing with engines failing because people have not changed their antifreeze/coolant. It's a big problem. It's an expensive problem. We'll talk about it when we come back. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Kyle is with us. We're talking about automotive tips that both of us believe that you absolutely need to consider doing for yourself. And Kyle recommended a torque wrench. If you are not familiar with how tight to tighten fasteners, nuts, bolts, etc., drain plugs, you can look up the torque specs for that particular vehicle, and you can use a torque wrench. And that'll take a little bit of getting used to as well. A torque wrench, there are a couple different kinds. There's the digital readout, which has a battery, which I do not recommend under any circumstances, because I don't like things that have batteries that need to be replaced, because I don't know how often I'm going to be able to get the batteries or how accurate the sensors will be over time that are in those devices. So I use mechanical torque wrenches. There's a kind that has a click feature, and you just turn the grip to the specific torque, and you tighten that fastener, and it will click when you reach that torque. You can get them for about $20, Harbor Freight brand. They're not great, but they work. And we've got a complete set of 1/4 inch, 3/8 drive, and 1/2 inch. here at the farm, and we, they're not the most accurate, but they're acceptable. So we might keep them in the toolbox of the truck, as we travel if we need something, for a somewhat accurate measurement. That would be fine for the do-it-yourselfer, about $20. But I wouldn't spend $100 on a torque wrench if you're a do-it-yourselfer and, you're not a professional mechanic. So that's one thought. Kyle, any comments about that?
Yeah, the crazy thing about those kind of great tools sometimes, which is a torque wrenches I'm talking about, not the Harbor Freight, but I'm talking about just torque wrenches. Vince, in 1 week, I couldn't believe my luck. But hitting garage sales, you can find people that are younger people that their dad died or something along that line, or their husband died, and they're just having their son or daughter sell off everything, all of his tools and things like that. In 1 week of garage sailing, I bought a Matco, which is a very good brand, click type half-inch drive torque wrench for $7 at a garage sale. And the same week, I found one that was a snap-on for $15. And I was just so excited, I couldn't believe it. And I've had them now for, I don't know, at least 4 years each, because I got them in the same week. But they work perfect, and I like the click much better than anything else. Anyway, that's my opinion, but you can usually if you get a good quality one, and you get there's also the type of a torque wrench that has a long, tiny little rod on top, and at the bottom of this rod, closer to your handle, there's a gauge, and this little rod is kind of like a needle, and it will move as you put torque on the bolt or nut or whatever it is you're trying to tighten down. The rod stays the same, but the handle itself you're pulling against. And so there's a little readout on there. And it's kind of difficult sometimes to be able to read exactly where you're at. And some of them, if you're not careful, the little rod is bent and tends to get caught up in, along as you go, and you'll either over tighten or not get it quite correct. I use my clicker types to test the ones that have, because I have a couple of them also that have the little long needle that runs down the top of the wrench. And I use the clicker type to test them just to kind of see how accurate they are. And the little needle type, the ones that I have anyway, have been very accurate. I mean, they're right there with the clicker, but it's not as precise. So I prefer the clicker type for sure.
Okay. So I just looked it up. I have both types. Back in the 70s when I was building race engines, I used the dial or the pointer type that you're talking about with the needle. And it was probably around $20 or $30 back then. SK Wayne brand, which is now called SK Tools. I'm looking at eBay. Craftsman 3/8 torque wrench, $5 current bid, $12.80 shipping. So if no one bids on it, or there's one bid right now, it looks like this is possible. You can get this torque wrench for $20 for a Craftsman brand. That would be with the pointer. So but that would be difficult to use under a vehicle. Okay. If you're going to be under a vehicle and you can't really see what you're doing, and you're reaching under there with, without a lift, you might want the kind with the clicker. I would suggest that. Kyle, antifreeze. Back in the 1940s and 1950s, I remember my grandfather saying, I got to check the alcohol. Now, what he meant was, in the radiator of his Ford car was alcohol mixed with water. And the reason for that was there were always the problems of the radiators and engines freezing in the wintertime. So if you live in the cold weather and it gets below 32 degrees, water freezes at 32. It will burst the radiator, it will burst the block, and, catastrophic damage if you don't have a way of protecting the engine cooling system from freezing. So they used to use alcohol, roughly 50% alcohol, wood alcohol with 50% water. The problem with that is that there's a water pump that needs lubricant. So the alcohol was not a very good lubricant. It would cause the water pumps to fail prematurely. Also, another thing that the cooling system needs is an anti-corrosion inhibitor. So you want, number one, you don't want the alcohol to evaporate. Number two, you want a water pump lubricant. And number three, you want a cooling system corrosion inhibitor, all of which alcohol did not do very well. So later on in the 60s, it became popular ethylene glycol, the green antifreeze. Now that was a slippery, slimy stuff, and it had the water pump lubricant. It had the anti-corrosion feature, the corrosion inhibitor, and it had anti-boil over and anti-freeze, and it did everything. It was really good. And it was good for a couple years. Now, what you could have done back then is you could have bought a can of water pump lubricant and corrosion inhibitor, and you could have just put in like a soda can full of that and topped off the antifreeze, and you'd be good for a couple more years. Well, what's happened since then is that the cooling systems have gotten very complex because of the different metals in the cooling system. So instead of having brass and copper and iron in the block, now you have aluminum, maybe some brass in the heater core, and you may have some steel, and you have some iron. And now all of these different metals will tend to generate electricity through the electrolyte, which is the coolant or antifreeze flowing through them, and they will self-destruct. So you need to change the coolant, and I'm going to use antifreeze as a synonym for coolant, because if you live where it's cold, it's antifreeze. If you live where it's hot, it's coolant. So I'll use antifreeze. The point is, if you do not change your antifreeze at the appropriate level, which might be 3, 4, 5 years, what happens is the head gaskets tend to fail. The intake manifold gaskets tend to fail where coolant or antifreeze flows through them. And the heater cores and the radiators tend to fail. And the valving that controls the heating and cooling system tend to fail. So what I'm saying is you absolutely, positively need to pay attention to changing your antifreeze and flushing it out. And the way to do it is, well, first of all, pets would love it because it tastes sweet, and it'll kill them. I mean, very quickly. A couple sips of antifreeze, and they're going to die. Cats, dogs, etc. So you got to be really careful what you do with this. You can pour it down the drain. That's probably the preferred method, as I've read, for disposing of antifreeze. It won't destroy the septic system. It won't destroy the city water system. But that's the recommended way. Some people will take it to the automotive shop and bring it back to them. They don't want it either. But anyway, there's a flush kit. It's called Prestone makes one, Prestone, an old name in cooling systems. Prestone Flush and Fill Kit, $3.44 at Walmart. And it's this yellow spout. You take out the radiator cap. You put in this yellow spout. It has a drain back fill hose adapter for your garden hose. And it has a T adapter and 2 hose clamps. And you literally cut one of the hoses. They tell you which one going to your heater system, your heater core. And then you can flush the radiator. Get out the old antifreeze, drain it out, and then refill it. What are your thoughts about that, Kyle?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Vince. You need to flush it out. I do mine approximately every 3 years, pretty much. And the crazy thing is, if your system is in good shape, the antifreeze is going to look good. Like mine, when I flush it out of there, it almost always looks really good, but it's losing its corrosion resistance. Whether you can see it or not, you can't see inside the engine.
And to make matters worse, that's absolutely correct. And so what happens is, class, if you have to replace a head gasket, you're looking at maybe $1,000, depending on the engine. If you have to replace a heater core, maybe $1,000. And a heater core, I'm going to replace one on the Jeep. Our son and I are going to do it. Maybe if the weather ever breaks, 20 degrees, we're going to work on it. But the heater core costs us around $20. But it's going to take hours to put it in. And this is in a real simple Jeep. Crank up windows, no floor mats, no air conditioning. I'm 4-cylinder. Everything's easy to get to, really easy to get to. Take a half a day probably. By the time we've, flushed it, drained it, filled it, replaced the heater core, $20 part. Now, if it were a complex vehicle like a Land Rover or a Jaguar or something like that, you might be looking at, half a day's labor or more. And it can be extremely expensive. And all you have to do to prevent most of that damage is to change the antifreeze at the recommended level. But it's not that simple. It's not that simple because there are all different kinds of antifreeze. And I'm not kidding. And I'm just going to go by colors. So there's pink, and there's orange, and there's blue, and there's green, and there's yellow, and there's light yellow. And some of them cannot be mixed with the others. And so you're going to have to do your research and look up your vehicle, make, model, engine, all that, and get several references to tell you exactly, and look at the owner's manual, exactly what that correct antifreeze is for your vehicle. Because some of them are not compatible with others. Some of them say, oh, you can add this, you can top off with this. But that doesn't mean you can fill it with it. That just means you can add a little bit of one color to mix with another color. And there's a universal. And the universal is not really universal. It's, you can top off with the universal. So Asian vehicles take one kind, Fords take one kind, Chryslers may take another, General Motors may take another, European vehicles may take another. And it's really complicated. And I absolutely, positively would not trust the guy at Walmart or the gal at Walmart or the guy or gal at the auto parts store to tell me which kind I need. I wouldn't do it. Kyle?
I agree completely. Vince, I just got a question for you. My experience with usually I like General Motors stuff, but my experience with the Dexcool from General Motors, the kind of a pinkish red stuff that they use has not been good. What's your opinion?
Yeah, we use the Dexcool approved General Motors fluids, but not the Dexcool brand. We'll be right back. Kyle's with us, and we're talking about automotive repairs and maintenance. Kyle asked me the question about GM Dexcool. So Dexcool is a GM's terminology for their antifreeze product. And do we use their brand? No, we do not. Now, we have a lot of vehicles here, class. I really don't want to tell you how many you'd think I was nuts. But we have a lot of vehicles here at the farm. And many of them are General Motors. And many of them are Mercedes. And we've got one Dodge. But the answer is for General Motors, we use AutoZone's brand, house brand of antifreeze. And we use also Prestone's brand of antifreeze, and we also use Xerox brand of antifreeze, and one other, Valvoline. So those are the brands that we use. Now, why do we use AutoZone's Dexcool equivalent? And the reason is because when we buy antifreeze, we don't buy it by the gallon. We buy it by the trailer load. And I'm not exaggerating. We have a 10-foot long trailer. It's 6.5 feet wide. And we will negotiate once a year when AutoZone has a sale. We will negotiate prices lower than the sale price. And we'll say, we'll come out with a trailer and we'll buy your antifreeze. And what they have to do literally, and this is no exaggeration, when we negotiate over the phone with them about what we'll pay, they have to collect antifreeze from other stores because they don't have enough in one store. So they might go to 4 or 5 stores and accumulate the antifreeze for us when we go pick it up. So we buy it like equivalent of a pallet load at a time, and we get a lower price. So we are happy with the Xerox, the Prestone, and the AutoZone brands of antifreeze. But we use a lot of it, and the reason we use a lot of it is we have a lot of machinery here, and we also fix other people's cars. But you must use the correct antifreeze, and generally speaking, do not mix it. Because if you use the wrong antifreeze, you can seriously and permanently damage your heater core. And then what will happen is when you turn the heat on, or you start your vehicle, whether it be the summer or the winter, you'll see what looks like steam coming out of your vents. And that's really antifreeze mixed with water. And you'll be breathing it. And it's not a good idea. So you will have a coolant leak over time if you do not change your antifreeze at the appropriate level. And it's extremely expensive, and it can all be, or almost all be, avoided. So how long does a heater core last? Well, I can tell you that our 1994 Jeep now needs a heater core. So that's an antique now. It's 27 6 years old plus, right? That's how long they last. Now the new ones are, the lightweight, new and improved flimsy design. The old ones were made out of brass. The new ones are made out of aluminum, and they don't last as long. So bottom line is, you really need to take care of your cooling system. You absolutely, positively must. Do not ignore it. Kyle?
Yeah, Vince, when DexCool first came out many years ago, I can't remember exactly when that was, but I remember being in the dealership, and I just started there at that time. And there was people that came in driving an SUV with they were still driving, it is one of the first years they came out with that 4.3. Anyway, it was some type of a little SUV. It's been a long time, so I don't remember exactly what it was. But anyway, they had driven this thing, and they had added coolant to it, regular old antifreeze green coolant to this vehicle, and they were up in Glacier Park, and they come in because for some goofy reason their car had overheated, but it was new, so under warranty, right? And so they drove it all the way to the dealership, overheated. And the reason is what they had done is the DexCool had reacted to the type of coolant that they had put in there and had turned to sort of a jelly-like substance. So what you're saying is, and it literally ruined the engine, and they had to pay for a new engine. General Motors would not cover that. But anyway, it was interesting because it says right on there, use only this DexCool type coolant, And so anyway, what you're saying as far as not mixing them can be very critical.
Mm-hmm. And if I were in a jam and I were overheating, I'd wait till the engine cooled, and if had to keep moving, I would use just pure water.
Yes.
Not another antifreeze. And I would not trust the guy behind the counter at the store to tell me which one. We'll be right back. So very quickly, class, how much is it going to cost to flush your cooling system? Well, $3.44 for the fill-in flush kit. The Prestone one, also Peak, P-E-A-K, makes one. They also make antifreeze, and their antifreeze is fine as well. So you can get that fill-in flush kit. It will let you hook your garden hose up to your cooling system, and it will reverse flush the old antifreeze out. Just make sure it runs downhill where pets, will not drink it because it'll kill them. And do your research and learn how to do it before you do it. And how much is the antifreeze going to cost? Well, you can buy antifreeze for about roughly $15 a gallon or less or more, depending on what kind your vehicle needs. And so get the right kind. You'll need about 2 gallons roughly. And the mixture concentration you want is about 50-50, meaning 50% distilled water, 50% antifreeze concentrate. And that will do the job, and it'll keep you going for 3 years. And it will save you from expensive repairs, or probably save you from very expensive repairs. So you want to get the old stuff out. You don't want to mix it, as Kyle said, because different kinds of antifreeze will react with other kinds of antifreeze. And literally, I've said this so many times, I want to say it one more. You cannot trust the guy or gal behind the counter to give you advice as to what kind. Those people really don't know. They don't know. And back in the 60s and the 70s, and maybe even the 80s, there was one kind of antifreeze that was green, and all the vehicles used it. Well, that's not the case anymore. There are like 7 or 8 or 9 different kinds of antifreeze, and they're not all compatible with each other. So I use something called G05 in the Mercedes, and it's expensive. And I don't want to spend extra money, but I don't want to replace the heater core. I don't want to replace the radiator. I don't want to replace the water pump. I don't want to replace head gaskets. So you use the right stuff. And make sure you use the kind for your vehicle. Kyle, any quick comments before we go into the next item?
No, Vince, that's fine. Pretty much all of my vehicles are use the old green antifreeze. I don't have anything very new. And so one of the things that will save you money if you can use the old green type antifreeze is to buy the concentrate. The other day I was in Walmart, and they have I think theirs is the SuperTech, or it was the blue one anyway, and they had the full-on, they had been out of this forever, but they had the full-on concentrate for $10 a gallon. And so if you mix that 50-50 with water, you now have 2 gallons for $5 a gallon. So it can save you some money if you can use, like Vince said, use the correct one. Some of them you can't do that with, but if you can use the old green stuff, buy the concentrate and mix it with distilled water and get two gallons for practically the price of one.
Mm-hmm. Right, because there's shipping involved and the container's the same size. If you get the 50-50 premixed, it'll save a lot of effort, right? That's ridiculous. Just get the full concentrate and you are certainly capable of adding 50% water to 50% antifreeze. Kyle, here's something that I've noticed. Mercedes-Benz vehicles used to, back around 2000, 2004, 5, 6, 7, they would say the transmission is sealed for life. What that meant was you don't need to check the transmission fluid. Now, it used to be, back in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there was a dipstick, and you could check the transmission fluid, you could check the color, you could check the smell. If it smelled burned, you know that your transmission was failing, and pretty soon you're going to have some serious transmission work. But you could check the transmission fluid, and you could top it off. Well, with Dexron or Ford or Mercon or whatever it happened to be for the kind of vehicle you were driving. Well, Mercedes has decided that we don't need to do that. So what they literally did was took the dipstick out of the engine compartment, and they put a cap in there with a sealed tab, kind of like a tamper-proof seal. So if you want to look, you can, but you're going to break the seal, the tamper-proof seal. And Mercedes, if you ever bring your vehicle back, they'll say, you opened this thing and you looked in there, and you should never have done that. Well, that's ridiculous. So with Mercedes, you can't check the transmission fluid. So if you have a little leak and you don't know it, you can destroy your transmission. So to check the transmission fluid, you have to buy a dipstick, a universal dipstick, and you get them on eBay for like $10. And so you break this little seal, you lift off the plastic cap, you push this universal dipstick down, and you measure the transmission fluid. And then you take the dipstick out, you put the cap back on, and you're good to go. But Mercedes doesn't want you messing with that. And Mercedes also tell you that they'll say it's sealed for life, but they won't say don't change the transmission fluid or change the transmission fluid. They say bring it to the dealer, and the dealer will tell you. Well, it's like having your engine sealed for life with oil, which is ridiculous. So you know that in the good old days, you would want to change your transmission fluid every 30, 40, 50,000 miles. And there's not much that's different with the new transmissions. It's the same principle. They have clutches. The clutches wear, and the clutches put debris inside the transmission, and the transmission oil filter picks up the debris and keeps it from destroying the transmission. But what happens is, at about 150,000 miles or less, that debris plugs up the transmission oil filter, and the car won't go. And so you bring it to the dealer, and the dealer says, oh, yeah, you need a new transmission, which is nonsense. What you need is a transmission filter replacement and the transmission fluid drain, maybe in a flush. So you're looking at, if you did it yourself, maybe $50, $60, $70, maybe $100. They would tell you that you need to trade your vehicle in because, well, you know, it's a transmission, it's $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 job. Kyle, any comments? And by the way, we fixed a bunch of these, and all you do is put it up on the lift, there's a little drain plug on the transmission pan. You drain out the transmission fluid when it's hot. Yeah, that's what we do anyway. But we have a lift, so it's a lot safer. And I don't recommend you do it when it's hot, but that's what we do. And look up how to do it. Drain the transmission fluid, take the pan down, it might have 10 bolts, and clean the pan, replace the filter, and replace the fluid, and you're good to go. What do you think about that?
Well, it's absolutely, and it really irritated me the first time I saw that, where they took out a dipstick completely. To me, it's just like, how stupid do they think people are? Obviously, they think people are very stupid, and unfortunately, most of them are, because they won't check anything anyway. It's amazing. It took constant training and telling people over and over and over again, how to check their transmission fluid, it being on level, started, in park, that kind of thing, forever, to get people to actually, I told them it's just like checking your oil. You just have to have the engine running. You would explain this over and over and over to people, and they're still intimidated by it for some reason. But it used to irritate the heck out of me when I wouldn't even buy a vehicle personally that did not have a dipstick for the automatic transmission. That's how mad it made me. I wouldn't even buy it. I mean, I know there's ways around it, but it just irritates the heck out of me.
We have a couple station wagons here at the farm, and both of them happen to be, well, actually 3 of them, and they all happen to be Mercedes station wagons. And I think that Mercedes station wagons are really kind of cool. It's a bygone era. Most people wouldn't even want to have a station wagon, but you think about it, in the days of going to the supermarket, and curbside service, you just let them open the tailgate and throw the packages in the back, and off you go. Well, we have a 2004 Mercedes E320. So that E means executive class, which really means that equals midsize. And the 320 is a 3.2 liter. So it's a V6 engine. It's a great little station wagon. 2004, they decided that you don't need no stinking oil dipstick either. So what Mercedes did was they said there's a dipstick tube for the transmission and a cap on it that says don't touch this. Don't check it. You'll break the seal if you look inside there. And then the engine oil has a dipstick tube, and it has a little handle that you can pull out, but if you pull it out, it's just a plug. So there's no dipstick attached to, the handle that you would hold on to at the end of the dipstick tube. So there's no way to check the oil except when you sit in the car, you turn the key to a certain sequence, and then it'll say checking. No, you haven't waited long enough. Do it again. And so you have to wait until the engine settles down for 15 minutes to check the oil. But there's no way to check the oil under the hood because there's no dipstick. And although there's a dipstick tube. So what I did was when we bought this vehicle used, I changed the oil, put the right amount of oil in it, checked the engine oil level with the computerized dashboard control. And then I took 2 dipsticks because I bought a dipstick on eBay, but it was too short, even though it was said it fit that vehicle. So I had to cut and braze 2 dipsticks together to make one long enough. And what I did was I measured how full is, and I made a dipstick to fit it. I custom took 2 dipsticks, put them together to make one that would be right. And it was a Mercedes replacement dipstick, but I had to cut and measure and braze it together so that I have one that would work. Now I can check the oil under the hood because I don't like the idea of not looking under the hood. Because when you look under the hood to check the oil, you can check the windshield washer fluid, you can check the belts, the battery condition, you can check all kinds of things. Look for leaks, check the coolant level. Looking under the hood is a big thing, but Mercedes thinks that we're all too stupid to raise the hood. Kyle, any comments?
Oh yeah, that's one of my soapbox issues. I just won't have, and unfortunately, Vince, unfortunately, that is most people. I have heard and seen myself people that buy these newer vehicles and they never look under the hood. They never think anything's going to go wrong. If anything, I've seen them, not heard, I've seen them drive into a dealership to get the dealership to put in more windshield washer fluid. And I just, I cringe if there ever is a major depression, the people are we as American society are going to die off by the millions. They'll be measuring it in millions just for the lackadaisical stupidity and lack of fortitude and initiative that people have been trained to live without.
Kyle, we do a lot of oil changes here at the farm for our customers. Our son has this little business, and it costs $48.80 for an oil change. That's a traditional oil change. Oil change including the oil and the filter. And initially when the customers come here, they go, what's with you guys? You know, why do we have to drop it off? Why can't we just wait? Why can't you do like 15 minutes like the other guys do? Well, because we drain the oil for hours, and while the vehicle's up on the lift, we check the tire pressure, we check the belts, we check the idlers, we check the steering suspension, we pull the fill plug on the differential, rear drive, front drive, four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive, check the transfer case, check the transmission, top off all the fluids, including the windshield washer, power steering, all that. That's how long it takes. And that's what is missing today. The quick oil change that's it. Oil change. Nothing else is even considered. We'll be right back. Class tomorrow, Sharon and Kathy are going to be teaching a class on the basics of the pantry, how to save money. And I've been calling it the 80-20 rule. I don't think they're calling it exactly that. And what I'm saying is they're going to teach you what you need to have, the 20% for sure that you need to have in your pantry that'll cover 80% of your needs, and how to do it economically. Kathy and Sharon both are domestic engineers, and they are exceptional at teaching and living this lifestyle. So I think you're going to be fascinated with that class. Friday, Bert is going to be with me for an hour, and I think he's going to interview me, and I'll be also teaching from the book. So Kyle's with us, and Kyle, I wanted to say to our class that we are teaching today the very basics, the fundamentals of what you need to think about in order to just do two simple things with your car to prolong the life, because I believe cars are going to be more and more expensive, more complicated. And if you got an older one, congratulations, because you're way better off with an older one than with a newer one. That being said, I have a challenge for the class, and Kyle is the perfect instructor to do this with me. And that is, I believe that you can put a whole house surge protector in your house for half of your wiring in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. And I'm going to tell you how to do it, and I'd love to hear Kyle's comments. Back in 1985, I was a computer jockey at a bank, and I wanted to put surge protection on all of our bank computers, and especially under the ones under my control in my department. And so I called American Power Conversion Company, APC, which I believed at the time was the best, and I still do. And I said, so what happens if I put in a surge protector in an outlet, and will it protect equipment not plugged into it? So if I have 10 outlets on a circuit, and I plug the surge protector into the first outlet, and then the 10th outlet, will that be protected even though it's not plugged into, or the equipment's not plugged into the surge protector? Will it protect it? They said that they had never been asked that question. And they did a test, and they found out that it would protect, but 75 volts more would be let through. So if you had a surge protector rated at 330 volts, and it would clamp down at 330 or more volts, the downstream outlet that was not, the downstream equipment that was not plugged into that surge protector would be protected at 405 volts, which is certainly way better than no protection. So all you have to do is go to the nearest outlet to your circuit panel, the nearest one electrically, the one that has the shortest cable feet between your breaker panel and the outlet, and plug in a surge protector. And that's it. That's the whole job. And it will protect half of the outlets in your house, half of the ceiling fixtures and half of the outlets, because you have a split phase system. Now, if you take two of those surge protectors and you plug them into outlets that are protected by two circuit breakers, one above the other, on the same side of the panel. So you open up the door of the panel and you find two rows or two columns of circuit breakers. And you find two that control receptacles. One breaker is above the other, and you plug one surge protector into one of those circuits and the other surge protector into the other circuit. So you're separated by two circuit breakers, one above the other. Your whole house will be then protected. Kyle, any comments?
That's correct. The only thing it won't do is, so if you open up that panel and you've got, say, 20 circuit breakers, you're only going to protect those two. So you want to make sure that those two can cover your electronics.
No, actually, Kyle, here's what happens. Literally, it will protect the whole panel.
Really?
Yes, it will protect the whole panel, but not as well as a made for whole house surge protector. It will. And the idea is electricity is lazy. Kind of like me. I'm lazy, and if I can find an easier way of doing it, I would. So a surge wants to go to ground the fastest way. So if you take, let's say you have an outlet for a freezer in your garage, and your circuit panel is in your garage. If that outlet has 10 feet of cable between the circuit breaker panel and the outlet, and you just plug in a surge protector in that outlet, that's the closest one to the ground. So when a surge comes into that panel, it wants to find the closest thing to a ground, and that's it. That's it. So that surge protector takes the hit. But that only protects half of your circuits, because you have two sides of your electrical panel. There's like a red side and a black side. Most people don't know that because they haven't opened their surge protector, their circuit breaker panels. But the bottom line is, if you find two breakers, one above the other, and they're real close to each other, they're one above the other, and the wiring is real close to the panel, it will protect the whole house. Not perfectly, but way better than doing nothing. Way better.
That's interesting, Vince. I don't think I've seen that surge protector before.
Yeah. Well, what I'm saying is, you can use any surge protector. You can, one of these surge protectors that you've got lying around the house. Most people have them lying around the house. They're just sitting in, some, box somewhere in the basement or the garage. They're not using them. Plug it in, and it will say that there's two different. One looks like a surge protector, and the other looks like a surge protector. One is a power strip or a power tap, and the other is a surge protector. Surge protectors say surge protection on them, on the bottom. So make sure it says that. Just plug it in. And if you don't know where to plug it in closest to the circuit breaker panel. And just let it sit there. Turn it on, and it will help protect your whole house, or at least half of it. Wow, Kyle, it went fast, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Any quick comments?
Nope, that's great. It's been great being on with you, Ben.
Hey, Kyle, thank you so much. By the way, our podcast is in the top 14 right now, worldwide. Well done, Kyle. Thank you.